Chapter 6 on November 13th at the Falls View Hotel. And can you please tell us your name and where you were born?
I'm Gerald Friedenfeld, and I was born in Vienna. You want the date?
Yes, that'd be great.
September 17th, 1924.
Okay. What were your parents' names?
My father's name was Rudolf Friedenfeld, and my mother was Henrietta. My father called her Yeti.
And did you have any brothers and sisters?
No, I was the only child.
What did your parents do for a living?
My father was a tinsmith. That means he made spouts for buildings, rain drain spouts. And he also had a store. He sold kitchenware, kitchen utensils, whatever a housewife uses, and toys.
And your mom?
My mother was a housewife. She kept a very good house.
Was it a kosher house?
Yes, my mother wanted to be kosher, but my father wasn't, and that led to all kinds of complications.
For instance?
Well, he would come home I must tell you this honestly. In a sense, I'm ashamed of it, but it's the truth. He would bring home cold cuts out of spite, just to spite the situation. Yes, that led to all kinds of difficulties.
And
yes.
Like, what was your upbringing like religious or?
Yes.
Kind
yes.
of in between.
Well, my upbringing was religious. Yes. As I say, my mother tried to keep a kosher house, and we had separate dishes for milky and for meaty and for Pesach. Yes. She was a very religious woman.
Were you bar mitzvah?
Oh yes. As a matter of fact, here I have a picture what I looked like on my bar mitzvah.
Oh, great.
Yes. I was bar mitzvah on, I think it was August 28, 1937. In fact, ladies, 2 months ago, on September 3rd, I celebrated the 56th anniversary of my bar mitzvah.
Wow.
Yes. And on this occasion here, I read, have you got this? Yes. On this occasion here, I had, I recited the Torah portion, the Haftorah Kitavo, Isaiah. And 2 months ago, I chanted it.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes. Our rabbi taught me to chant it.
So did you then go to a Jewish school?
No, I went to a secular school, local school in Czechoslovakia, in our little hometown, until Hitler ended it all.
So then did you have many non-Jewish friends?
Yes. I wouldn't say many. I had some. Yes.
Did any of your non-Jewish friends switch alliances after Hitler came to
Oh,
power?
yes. They were Nazis, as a matter of fact. And when they were boys, I went skating with them and swimming, and their fathers were my father's school friends. And my father thought, oh, he's protected because nobody would harm him. The Germans are his friends. Well, he couldn't have been more wrong, and he was wrong. Absolutely, yes. They switched instantly. When the Germans marched in, they put on their brown uniforms, their SI uniforms. And they put my father in jail. Yes. Yes. Not only him, but all Jews in our hometown.
Do you remember specifically when things began to change in your community?
Yes, in the middle 30s. In the middle 30s, as I recall, when anti-Semitism began to become real bad. And of course, the Nazis were in power in Germany, and it wasn't long before they marched into Austria in March 1938. And 6 months later, they marched into what was then known as Sudetenland. That was an area surrounding Bohemia and Moravia. And that's when my father and all the other Jews were arrested And I still see him vividly looking at my mother and me through the bars in the county jail. Yes. And a few days later, he and all the other Jews were packed into big trucks and hauled into so-called no man's land. You see, there was a portion of Czechoslovakia that was left, the internal part of Czechoslovakia, interior part. And the men were dumped on a highway, out in nowhere. That's right. That was in October, late October, 1938. And a few days later, there were no men left in our hometown, no Jewish men. And a couple of days later, women and children were told we had to be out of our house in 24 hours. So we had to scurry and rent a horse and a cart and load it with whatever we could and leave.
To go
Talk about ethnic cleansing. Yeah. I know what ethnic cleansing is. Go where?
Yeah,
into no man's land, outside town. That's as far as the Germans moved. And on the other side of the highway were the Czechs. And that's where we dumped our belongings. And that's where we lived for three weeks, out under the open sky, in late October and early November.
There was no shelters.
Yes, well, not to begin with, but there was a Jewish community in a town called Brünn. Do you know Hanush Gross, Anita's husband, Anita's father? Mm-hmm. He came from that community. Mm-hmm. And some good Jews brought us huge tarpaulins. You see, in Europe in those days, railway cars were not enclosed with metal like here. They were open and covered with tarpaulins. And they brought us a number of these huge tarpaulins, and we draped them over our furniture on the highway and weighted them down with rocks so the wind wouldn't blow them away. And sure enough, I remember vividly, as soon as we had created our, you might call it a tent city, it began to rain. Mm. That saved us. Mm. And they brought us a kitchen, and we had food, and...
How old were you at this time?
14.
So your schooling was completely interrupted?
Totally.
So.
That was it. Mm. Yes.
So when you couldn't go to school anymore, what was your daily life like? What did you do?
Well, from that place, we were eventually, 3 weeks later, we were taken to a refugee camp. The same people who brought us the tarpaulins somehow got hold of a huge leather factory, a leather tannery that was idle, dirty, filthy, we were told, and they had it cleaned up. They tore out all that old machinery, and they built bunks, bed bunks, and a kitchen, and washrooms, and that's where we were taken. And we spent the winter there. And instead of going to school, I learned to become a tailor, because everybody knew we would have to emigrate. So what good would it be to learn Latin or French if I couldn't sew on a button? So we were taught to sew clothes, sew buttons, the simplest work. And that's what I did for several months in preparation of emigration. Yes.
Now, at this time, were you with both of your parents?
Yes.
So you were reunited with your father?
Yes, that's right. And now I want to show you something.
Okay.
In March, that's where they... Oh, you want to focus?
We've lost our camera.
The photographer. Do you know how to operate it?
Yes, I can do it.
Shall I hold it up?
Yeah, a little. Yeah, that's good. Okay.
This was the last picture showing me and my parents. Okay. This was taken in March, shortly after the Nazis moved into Czechoslovakia. All right?
Okay, got it. Just get you that.
And now comes a period that was awful in a sense, but it led to my salvation. And I'll tell you. On April 12th, the Nazis moved into our camp, into our refugee camp. And they selected some of us for what they call Turnen. Turnen in German means to do gymnastics. And what they meant was beating and torture. And one of these torture methods consisted of forcing us to climb up high ladders, 25 feet maybe, and to jump from the ladder onto cobblestones, just for fun. That's the way they amused themselves. And I don't know how many times I climbed up and jumped, and I broke my leg right here, my right leg. And that was the end of gymnastics for me. And a few days later, they allowed me to be taken to a hospital. And here's a picture of that hospital. I don't know if you can see this.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
This was a Catholic hospital, and we were placed into here. Here are the two nuns in the back. I don't know if that shows up.
Yeah, it's a little tiny. But
Yes, it's tiny. And there are two of us in each bed because the camera couldn't scan the whole width. I am here. That's me.
Which one?
Right here.
Hold it up a little bit with
One
your
moment.
finger.
Right here, above my finger.
Diddle down.
Down?
That's good.
That's me.
Okay.
All right?
Uh-huh. Okay.
Fine. And while I was in the hospital, one day, here comes our photographer. While I was in the hospital, one day a couple showed up at my bedside. And the lady's name I don't remember, but the man introduced himself as Drucker, that was his name. And he said he was an architect. And they asked me if I would like to go to England. And I said, well, I cannot make this decision. You would have to ask my parents. So evidently they went to see my parents in the camp, because 4 weeks later I was on a train to England. How they found me, how this was arranged, to this day I don't know. I came here hoping I would get some enlightenment about this, but nobody knows.
Your parents didn't talk to you about the train ride?
If they did, I don't remember it. Mind you, I was in the hospital until a week before I left.
So what exactly do you recall about what you were told about your journey by
Very
your
little,
parents?
very little. They just told me I would go to England, and a week before, I was so excited about leaving. A week before I left, the doctors removed my cast because they feared that the Germans would do it on the border, and then I would be immobilized. I couldn't walk because my leg would be stiff. Well, I had to walk with 2 canes to loosen up my leg so I could use my muscles. I was taken to the capital of Moravia, to Bern, and that's where I met a friend of mine. That's where my parents left me. And the next morning, this young boy and I, we grew up together. We went on, his parents placed us on a train, and we went to Prague. And that's the last we saw of our parents. I said this afternoon in one of these sessions we had that the excitement of the train ride and of going to England, whatever that meant, I had no conception what that meant. I was so excited, I really didn't miss my parents.
So did you have any idea that you might not see them again?
If I did, I don't remember it. I'm sure they did. Frankly, I don't think I did. The thought was too horrible to entertain. Yes, and here I was on that train. I couldn't bend my leg. So there was a lady in charge of the transport. As I remember it, there were 136 children, from 2 to 14. I was one of the oldest. And the lady in charge was an American Jewish lady, a Mrs. Eisenberg. She was so lovely. I couldn't sit because my leg was so stiff. So I slept in her compartment on a bench. That's how I spent the night, going through Germany. Yes.
Do you remember what you were carrying, if you had anything special from home that you brought with you?
Luggage? I really don't, I cannot remember what I had. I suppose I had 1 or 2 suitcases, but I have no recollection of it. Yes. All I had was 2 canes in my hand.
Right.
And that's how I arrived in London.
What was the date of your departure from Czechoslovakia?
May 31st. And we arrived in London on June 2nd.
And the year?
39, yes. We arrived in London on Victoria Station, and we were met by a wonderful lady. And this is she. Her name is Lola Hahn Warburg. You want me to raise it, or?
It's fine.
She welcomed us at the station, and here I was hobbling along with my 2 canes, and she had a man with her, a tall man with a pipe in his mouth, and she introduced me to him. His name was Dr. Harry Roberts. He was the editor of a very prominent weekly magazine called The New Statesman and Nation. She introduced me to him and told him what happened to me. He couldn't believe it. I said, okay, fine. And she told him what happened to me, and she mentioned that I would need medical attention because I needed a new cast. He said, I'll take care of this boy. So she handed me over to him, and he took me to his office in the West End, Fleet Street, I believe. And he asked that was on a Friday afternoon. The weekend was impending, the long English weekend. And he sent his secretary out to buy me some lunch. And would you believe what I ordered? A ham sandwich. At home I couldn't get a ham sandwich, but there, of all things, I ordered a ham sandwich. And after that, we went on a train to Sanderstead. That was a very fancy suburb near Croydon. Croydon was then the only airport in London. And so that's what we arrived at his home, and he introduced me to his family and to a man. This man's name was Jerusalem. He was a painter from Vienna, whom he met several years earlier, a Jewish painter. And when the Nazis marched into Austria, he rescued him. He got him out, and he lived with them. And Mr. Jerusalem became my interpreter. My English was rather sketchy. He became my interpreter, and the family asked me why I walked with 2 canes. So I tried to make them explain to them. They couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe what happened. Why would the Germans do this? Well, why? How to explain it to them? Anyway, the next day he took me to Croydon Hospital, and a cast was fashioned on my foot with a stirrup so I could walk. And when we got home, the cast was not set yet, it wasn't hard. So this prominent Englishman told me to jump on his back, climb on his back. And here he carried me into his house in front of his neighbors. This was such a lovely family. Now, the welcome I had, from Mrs. Warburg and from Dr. Roberts, everything was so beautiful there. I think I completely forgot my parents. Would you believe? I just blocked it out. And they were just lovely. And a few days later, he took me to Mrs. Warburg. I stayed at her home for more medical treatment. And then she took me to the kibbutz at Great Engine Farm near Ashford.
Now, when you say kibbutz, was that
a farm
built on the concept of kibbutz in Israel?
Yes. Yes, we were there in order to become chalutzim, to become trained in preparation of going to Palestine. Only, you see, under the terms of the youth aliyah, the English wouldn't let us in until we were 16 years old. So we were taken out of Europe to England, sort of to park us in England until we became 16, and then we were supposed to go on to Palestine. Only the war broke out, and our shipping was requisitioned by the armed forces. And here we were stuck in England.
What was your life on this kibbutz like?
Well, I didn't do much work because I couldn't with my leg, but all the others worked. For example, June was hay harvest, and then was grain harvest. Yes, it was a regular farm. Mm-hmm. It was owned by a man named Naaser, I remember. I still see him and his wife and his daughter riding around, dressed in fancy clothes, on horseback.
And where was this? In what town?
Near Ashford, in England, in Kent. Mm-hmm. Yes. Anita's father was there with me, Hanush Gross. I haven't seen him for 54 years, until yesterday.
Wow.
Yes.
How long did he stay on the kibbutz?
Well, we stayed there about 2 months. We lived in old railway cars that were set down in a meadow, and that was fine in summer. But when the rains came in October, they leaked, and we had mud all over the place. So we were taken away from there and moved to a place in South Wales called Llandaff Castle, Llandaugh, near Cardiff, in South Wales. There we worked and stayed until June 1940, because this place was close to an English airfield, and the Nazis bombed the airfield. And I suppose the people were afraid they might hit us, so we were moved to Greich Castle, North Wales. Yesterday I saw a picture of Greich Castle in a book, last night. Yes. In fact, in a group this afternoon, I mentioned Greich Castle, and another man said, I was there. Yes.
Wonderful.
This was a castle, who knows when it was built into a hillside on a slope, a monstrosity. Cold, couldn't heat it, impossible. I must tell you a story about Greich Castle. There was a staircase, an enormous staircase, wide and huge, maybe 4 stories high, and all marble, gorgeous. And one day we had a wedding there. One of the functionaries of Youth Aliyah was Aryeh Hendler, was his name. And he married a lovely young woman, Henny Prilutsky. And there she came down that staircase. We were stationed, kids were stationed on either side of a staircase with candles in our hands. No other illumination. Very, very romantic. And here she came, they both came down that staircase in her long train, in her white gown, and I fell in love with her. With Henny Prilutsky. She was just gorgeous. Didn't have much future. I still remember that. She was just a beauty. Yeah.
How many other children were at the castle?
Oh, who knows? 100, 150. I really don't know.
At
We had cold showers all winter long. No heat, no hot water. Yes.
At this time, were you writing letters to your parents or in any contact?
No. I wrote, as a matter of fact, I wrote to my mother via an uncle in Brussels. I would write to him. He would take my letter out of the envelope and put it into another envelope and send it to my mother. And the same, the other way around, back and forth. And this ended abruptly when the Nazis marched into Belgium in May of 1940. And from that time on, as I remember it, I corresponded with my parents via the Red Cross. And each letter consisted of 25 words. And that included the address.
Well, do you remember what those 25 words were?
What can you say? I'm well, hope you are well, and that's about it. And the last letter I received, as I remember it again, was early in spring 1943. And the address my mother put down on the letter was capital T-3. I imagine it was a building of some kind. That was the location, the address. That was the last sign of life I had from my parents.
Do you remember what that letter said?
Just like, we are well and I hope you are well, I suppose. What more can you say?
Did you manage to save any of those letters?
No, all gone. Too bad. All gone. Yeah. That was the last letter, and of course what I didn't know then was, at the same time, this was Warsaw, from the ghetto. And at the same time, there was the Jewish uprising. That was the end.
Did you know what was going on at home at the time?
No. We had no idea. I don't know if anybody knew. I suppose some people must have known, because people came out of Europe and reported. The British government knew. Now we know that the British government knew, and Roosevelt knew, but no action was taken.
Did any of the other children talk about what was happening at home?
I don't know if the subject ever came up. I don't know if we ever talked about our parents. They were out of our life.
So you were on this kibbutz.
Yes.
And the intention was to make Aliyah eventually.
The intention was to make agricultural workers out of us.
Did you ever go to Israel?
No. No. In 1943 I joined the army, the Czech army, and I became a tank driver. And then I went to France after the invasion. We went over to France in August 1944, and from there on to Czechoslovakia. And I made an enormous mistake of staying in Czechoslovakia. I should have taken out British citizenship, and I could have gone anywhere in the world without any quota.
What was it like for you returning to Czechoslovakia?
Hard. You lived from meal to meal, scrounging for food, at first. And then after about a year or a year and a half, it improved.
And do you remember why you chose to return to Czechoslovakia?
Well, this was my home, and I had hoped to find somebody, and I did. I found a cousin. There were three cousins in our family on my father's side. Hans Weiss, Hans Friedenfeld, and myself. And I found him. He returned from concentration camp. He survived, just barely. And I was happy to have somebody here. And then my cousin Hans Weiss in York, Pennsylvania, made contact with us. And when he heard I was alive, he wrote to me such a lovely letter. He was 10 years older than I. And he wrote to me, come to America, he said, let me be a father to you. So, how could I turn down such an invitation?
When you returned to Czechoslovakia, did you already know what had happened to your parents?
Yes. I went to my hometown and I saw our house in shambles. The whole place was in a shambles. There was a bridge about a block away, and the bridge and the houses changed hands between the Germans and the Russians several times. And then as the Germans retreated, they dynamited the bridge. And when they blew up the bridge, all the houses in the neighborhood sort of jumped up and cracked. What a mess. I went up into my parents' bedroom. Awful mess. The Russians lived in there. There was dirt, filth, and would you believe, a copy of Hitler's Mein Kampf lay there.
You were still a pretty
soldier.
young man.
Yes.
How were you able to cope with all this? I mean, return.
I ran away. I ran away as fast as I could. I went back to the train station and I ran.
Where did you run to?
Back to my unit. Back to my army unit. See, I was given leave, and I was given my army rations, so I had something to eat. And I got on a train. I rode the train all night, and I didn't want to see that house anymore. But the next time I came back, the house was cleaned up and fixed up, and this crack was filled in. Oh, maybe 6 months later, 8 months later, and a family moved in. So I told the people they did a wonderful job in maintaining the house. I said, live here. And I didn't want any rent from them. I said, just keep the house in good shape. Little did I know that 2 years later the communists would take over and I would run away. So the house is still there, but there's no point even in trying to get it back.
So,
yes.
You said you got this letter inviting you to come to the United States. What happened then?
Well, at first I resisted. I said, why should I emigrate? Well, the urgency came up when the communists took over. When the communists, on February 26, 1948, the communists took over the government. And suddenly, this letter became very urgent for me. And but first I had to get out of Czechoslovakia to emigrate. So I did.
How did you do that?
Well, I found a man. I met a man. He happened to be the gunner in my tank. I met him on the street in Prague. Ed Lanik was his name. He was from Zagreb, from Yugoslavia. And I told him I want to get out. He said, I have an uncle. He's a border guard. Go and see him. He'll take you out. Well, this was a foolish thing to do, just to trust people blindly. But I did. My Hebrew name is Bezalel. That means in the shadow of God. Be-tzal-el. And I must have been in the shadow of God because everything I did worked. Everybody I was referred to and passed on to did exactly as expected. So I took a train to the border and I went to see this man. He was a border guard. And I told him I would like to meet I had a girlfriend in Vienna. But I had to go to the Austrian side to meet her. So he took me across. And I telephoned her and she came from Vienna by train. And we spent a day together in an inn, in a tavern. Well, I told her, Giza was her name, Giza Nussbaum. So I told her, she said, you know, you're already in Austria. Why go back? So I said, well, I've got to straighten out my affairs. All right. So I went back and I went to see my cousin and we arranged to meet again the following Friday night. And would you believe, it worked because this border guard said, if you want me to help you get across, you have to be here before June 1st. Because he was supposed to be replaced by young fanatics with bloodhounds. And I was back. And sure enough, he showed me where to cross, and I did. And an Austrian border guard hid me, and he called my girlfriend. She came from Vienna on a night train. She brought false papers for me, and in the morning, when another train came from Prague to Vienna, we boarded that train, and off we went. Everything worked like clockwork.
How did you feel doing all that?
I was so much in love with her, I didn't even sense any danger. I felt so protected. And yet, everything hung by a hair.
So then, where did this train take you?
To Vienna. There were several periods in my life when everything I did worked just beautifully. And here I was in Vienna, inside the Russian zone of occupation. And that's where I was for 2 years.
What was the date when you arrived in Vienna? Do you remember?
Yes. Early June 1948.
And you were there?
2 years. How did I make a living? I tell you the truth. Black marketing. Selling candy and chocolates. Buying and selling. That's how I made a living.
How did you get into the business?
Necessity. Giza's brother was a wholesaler in black marketing. And so he let me in on this on the side. Yeah. Those were times I wish I could reconstruct how we lived.
Was it an enjoyable time for you living in
No.
Vienna?
No, it was not. Because Vienna was partly still in shambles from bombardment. And everybody was on edge. Nobody knew what happens next. First of all, you couldn't leave the international zone, the American zone and the British zone, for fear of being kidnapped by the Russians. This was a daily occurrence. People would disappear. Right off the street, they would be pulled into cars and disappear. Frightening. Just like drive-by shooting today, that's how people disappeared. Yes.
Your intention had been to go to America.
Yes.
So, did you know you were going to end up staying in Vienna for that long?
No, but I had no choice because, you see, I had to wait for the Displaced Persons Act of 1950 to be enacted by the Congress. And this happened in July 1950. And President Truman signed it into law. And when that happened, then the gates opened. And hundreds of thousands of people came here.
So when did you leave Vienna?
I left Vienna early in December, one day in December.
Of 1950?
1950. And I arrived in New York on December 22nd. The train took us from Salzburg to Bremerhaven, Germany. And we came on a troop ship, on a troop transport, the USS General Bletchford.
Were you traveling with friends or your girlfriend? Or?
No. Well, I married my wife in Vienna, in Salzburg. No, wait, in Vienna. And I flew to Salzburg because I didn't want to traverse through the Russian zone. I was afraid. I flew from Vienna to Munich. And I took a train back to Salzburg, and she came to Salzburg to meet me there. And she saw me off. And I went to America, and she followed a year later.
Why didn't she come with you at the time?
Because when we decided to get married, I already had my immigration papers. And had I waited for her, I would have had to relinquish. You see, I was assigned a number, an immigration number. And if I had said, I don't want to go now, they would have taken away that number and put me at the end of the line. So we decided I would go ahead and see to it that she would get immigration papers.
Now, this is a difficult question, but
Yes.
the last time you had left the people that you loved to go on a long journey, you never saw them again. What was it like for you leaving your wife to go
Very
to
difficult.
America?
Very difficult. It was an agonizing decision, but we thought it's the right decision. Because I could do more for her from America than if we had both sat in Vienna waiting. We had to weigh what to do, yes.
So, so what do you recall about your trip over
Over here,
to America?
I was sick for 9 days. I mean sick. It was horrible. We were wedged into, do you know what steerage means?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's how we traveled. 3 days ago I was at Ellis Island, and I saw a cross-section, a picture of a liner, an ocean liner, built for the immigration trade, specially built for the immigration trade. And the first class and second class passengers were in fine cabins on top of the deck, and 3,000 immigrants were stuffed into steerage down on the bottom. Yes. And they showed a cross-section, what it looked like. Well, when we traveled from Europe to here, we slept in bunks 5 high, and I swear to you, my nose was about 4 inches from the upper bunk. That's how we traveled. In fact, I looked for some kind of a display or a mention of the immigrants who came in, the displaced persons, hundreds of thousands. There was nothing. So I asked one of the park rangers there at Ellis Island, why not? He said, I don't know. He said, you're right. There's not a word here, nothing, no mention. So he gave me the name of a lady, the superintendent of the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island, to write to her and to suggest that something be done, to put on a display of that period, because hundreds of thousands of people came here.
Is that where you arrived?
No.
Where did you arrive?
I arrived at Pier 49.
In
Manhattan.
Manhattan.
Yes. We drove. My cousin's husband drove me past there.
Do you remember the date that you?
Yes. December 22nd, 1950.
And
I remember it so clearly.
tell me about your arrival. What you remember about it?
Well, first of all, the night before, we arrived the night before, somewhere near where the Verrazzano Bridge is now. And the ship was anchored in that area. And I stood on the railing, and I saw the traffic on a parkway on the Brooklyn side. My Lord, unbelievable, the sight of all the lights of Manhattan, all these skyscrapers. I couldn't believe it. I was so happy because this was the first time in 9 days that I wasn't sick, because the ship wasn't tossing around, it was standing still. And the excitement of being met by my cousin, of arriving in America, astonishing. And the next day my cousin met me, Lucy, and just traveling uptown from there to, what was it, 116th Street, where her father lived, where I was going to stay. I was so excited, I don't know how to describe it. She's gone now. She died last year of cancer. Too bad. Yeah, I remember that. And seeing all my relatives, because I had no...
This was your first
that's right.
family.
Yes, that was my family here, yes. And I stayed here 3-4 days, I believe. And then I took a train to York, Pennsylvania, to be with my cousin. Yes.
And
Hunt.
what kind of work did you get? Or did you go back to school? Or?
No, he found me a job in a factory as a timekeeper. The factory made metal office furniture in York, cold steel company. Yes.
And how well did you adjust to your new life in America?
How did I?
Yeah, how
I had no difficulties.
Yeah.
First of all, I spoke the language. And secondly, everything I saw was an adventure. That's the way I am. Everything interests me. And I just had a wonderful time. Only, I earned 90 cents an hour. That was my first job. And I lived at the Y in York, Pennsylvania. And would you believe what little I earned? I set money aside in expectation of Elizabeth's arrival. And she came in October, the following October, yes. I had help. Another thing that's so astonishing, a congressman helped me to get the immigration papers to her.
How did you arrange that?
Through my cousin. That was unheard of. In Europe, this wouldn't happen.
So you finally got your wife here
Yes.
and set up a home, I imagine.
Yes. When she arrived, we spent, I think, 3 days or 4 days at the now what was this fancy hotel on the park, right in the St. Moritz.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Whatever money I saved, I blew.
I'm sure it was worth it.
Mm-hmm. I still remember we ordered scrambled eggs and chicken livers, and it was served to us on silver.
Wow.
That was the last few dollars we had. St. Moritz on the park, yes, right on Central Park with a view of the park. That's, can you imagine?
She must have been very impressed.
She thought I made $1 million. Yes.
So did you have any children?
Well, eventually, yes. One day a daughter arrived. I don't know how that happened. That was a surprise. And 3 years later, a son.
Another surprise.
No, that was not so much. The first one was. Yes.
So they're grown now?
Yes.
Have you told them about all the experiences?
Yes, but not in any organized way. Just a little here, a little there. They didn't show much interest yet. Maybe this will. Maybe this recording here will tell them the story in some fashion. Yes, in an organized way. And then as I recall other instances, I can record this in writing and maybe add to it. This is very valuable.
Have you noticed in any ways that your past experiences affected your children?
My past experiences affected my children. Yes, of course. Because, well, for example, what happened to me in the past, this psychiatrist talked about it today. Being, in a sense, being sent away by my parents, I interpreted this as being neglected, pushed away. And this led to enormous anger on my side, on my end. Enormous. And not so many years ago, I was still a very angry man. And our Rabbi Brickman, who is also a Jungian analyst, he helped me enormously overcome this anger. Yes, I worked with him for 4 years. He's a very patient man, very insightful man. Yes, I'm a different person now than I was 8 years ago, very much so. And as a result, I'm much more patient with my children too. I don't criticize them so much.
Do they have children now?
Yes.
Do you think they will tell their children
not for a while, because they're too young. How this will ever, how I'm ever going to talk to their children, I don't know yet.
Well, maybe this will help.
Maybe so. When they get a little older, right now they're only 6 and 8, my daughter's children, and my son's 3 and 6 months, so that's a little early. They'll have to wait a bit. But this would be a wonderful base. Yes.
I'm curious about, you were just talking about having to go through therapy with,
yes.
with the rabbi and how
yes.
this helped you. Do you now have a sense of what you've gained and what you lost from your experiences as a child of the Holocaust?
I've gained a sense of balance. I've accepted what happened to me. As I said, I'm not so angry. And also, having a lovely woman, a loving woman, helped me enormously. When the opportunity arose to come here, Dorothy said to me, "You must go. It's important for you." There was no doubt about it. And coming here, meeting people from the past, from 54 years ago, it's a thriller. And seeing so many lovely people, sharing so many experiences.
And what about the things that you lost?
The things I lost, well, they're irretrievable. I have to live without them. I have to do whatever I can.
What does it mean to you to survive?
To go on living, to be kind to others, to be loving.
If since you're really making this tape for your children and their children, what do you think are the most important things that should be carried on to future generations?
The knowledge of what happened. And the fact that I managed to go. In spite of what happened. The fact that I managed to do it. At times I doubted if I could. And then I summoned new strength from somewhere, and I went on, kept going.
Is there anything else
It's
you'd
just
like?
marvelous that I managed
Yeah.
to come here, to live this long, to be healthy. Is there anything else?
Is there anything else? I know you brought some photographs. Are there any that you didn't show that you would like to
Well,
show?
those were the main ones, yes.
Anything else you'd like to say before we close?
Before we close, I'm very grateful to you for doing this. My daughter kept saying to me from time to time, "Dad, why don't you write your story?" Well, this will be it. This will be. I have much more to add, I'm sure, as I recall other instances and episodes in my life which I can fit into this story. But I've never done anything like this. It's wonderful. You know, at times I wasn't even aware that you were filming me.
That's great.
I was so involved.
All right, well, thank you very much. It's been
I do
wonderful.
thank you, ladies, for doing this for me.
I really thank you for...
If this can be of help in any kind of research, I'll be delighted. If anybody wants to hear any more of what I have to say, let me know. Thank you.